One of my projects this summer is I'm reading through the Old Testament. I'm reading through the Hebrew Bible from cover to cover. And this isn't my first time through. Hopefully it won't be my last time through. But every time I go through it, there's always something new that hits me, always something new that strikes me. And one of the things that's striking me on this time through is the emphasis in the Hebrew Bible on hospitality, on caring for other people, about welcoming other people into your home, welcoming people to your table, welcoming people into your life. And it's not just like your friends and relations and neighbors, although that's certainly there too, but specifically in the Hebrew Bible, it's about those who are vulnerable. And the triad that always gets mentioned dozens of times throughout the Hebrew Bible is the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. In that culture, these people were the most vulnerable of the vulnerable. They had no one to look after them. And God, as soon as the Israelites are outside of Egypt and they're in the promised land, God says, you remember what it's like to be a foreigner. You remember what it's like to be a foreigner in a foreign land. Now, treat foreigners right. You knew what it was like to be like an orphan, to have no country. You know what it's like to be a widow, to be completely vulnerable at the whim of other people. Now treat those people right. And so God, throughout the Hebrew Bible, tries to set up a society that is good to people who are vulnerable, and where his people were going to be hospitable, where they're going to open their homes, open their tables, open their hearts and their lives to these other people. So with all the emphasis on extending hospitality to others in the Hebrew Bible, one of the things that sort of strikes me in today's gospel lesson from the 10th chapter of Luke is how it's basically the exact opposite. So Jesus is sending his disciples out to continue his ministry. He's like, I've been teaching, I've been healing, now you're going to do that. And so he sends them out, and here's what he says. He says, carry no purse, no bag, no sandals, and greet no one on the road. Whatever house you enter, first say, peace to this house. And if anyone is there who shares in peace, your peace will rest on that person, but if not, it will return to you. Remain in the same house, eating and drinking whatever they provide, for the laborer deserves to be paid. Do not move about from house to house. Whenever you enter a town and its people welcome you, eat what is set before you. Cure the sick who are there and say to them, the kingdom of God has come near. So Jesus tells his disciples basically to do the exact opposite what I would tell people to do. What I would say is take everything you need. Rely on no one for anything. Take your food, bring tents, camp outside the villages, the towns, be completely self-sufficient. And then once all your needs are taken care of, then you go into the town and you take care of their needs, and you feed them and you pray for them and you heal them, and then you go back and take care of your own needs. But your job isn't to take, your job's to give. And it's the exact opposite of what Jesus says. Jesus says when you go in, you bring nothing, and you rely completely on the kindness of those who are there. You rely on them for providing your lodging, so you sleep under their roof. You rely on them for food. You eat from their table. You eat whatever they put down. Jesus says that twice, which is a little weird. It does not mean that if they serve gross things, you kind of have to like muscle through it. What he means there is, he's talking to a bunch of Jews who have kept kosher their entire lives, and what he's saying there is, if you go into a town and you stay at a house that's not Jewish and they're not serving kosher, it is more important that you receive the hospitality that they are giving you than it is for you to maintain the laws of kosher, which is crazy. I mean, it's incredible. Receiving hospitality is of more important than keeping the kosher laws of the Old Testament, which is It just shows how important hospitality is. But notice here, it's not, Jesus isn't telling them to be hospitable. Jesus is telling them to receive hospitality, to accept hospitality, to depend on the hospitality of others. I know a lot of people, and particularly in this church, are incredibly giving, wonderful people. And people that would give the shirt off their back, the food off their table, just remarkable people. But I also know a lot of people where it's a lot easier to give that shirt off your back than it would be to receive the shirt off the back of somebody else. Like, oh, no, I don't need to do that. You need to do that. But Jesus wants his people to be vulnerable enough that they are willing and able to receive the kindness of strangers. And that's all about relationship. I mean, the reason Jesus wants his disciples to do this is because that's the way relationships are really built. If the disciples were just outskirts of town, they had their own food, they had their own thing, they had their own tents, and they just came in and prayed for people, great, but they're not fostering any relationships. When they're sleeping under the same roof, when they're eating from the same table, when they wake up in the morning and they're drinking coffee out of the same coffee pot, that's where relationship happens. Relationship only, real relationship, is only able to happen in times of vulnerability, when you open yourself up to the kindness of others and they open themselves up to your own kindnesses. And I have to believe that when the disciples left these towns, that they turned to the people that provided them hospitality and they just said, "Thank you so much. It was wonderful being with you. Bless you. Thank you." And I have to believe the people who had them stay in their homes and eat from their tables, they were like, "Thank you so much for coming. Come anytime. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for healing people. Thank you for telling us about the kingdom of God. Thank you for everything you did." The whole thing would have been just one big gratitude fest of people grateful for one another. Because that's what happens when people open themselves up to vulnerability and relationship. And that's what I think is going on here in this text, is Jesus is sending his disciples out, not just to be healing and prayer machines, but to enter into relationship with other people, to minister to others, to be ministered to by others, and in the course of that, create a ministering community. Imagine the disciples a year later thinking about that town, that house they stayed in, that breakfast they had, the kids, how cute they were. There was a cute dog. They would have always remembered that. And those people in those towns would always remember those strangers who came in and prayed for them and healed their sick and taught them these wonderful things about the kingdom of God. There would be these bonds of affection that would hold them together, and that is what Jesus means when he says, "Behold, the kingdom of God has come near," because that right there, that love, that vulnerability, that relationship, there's where the kingdom of God rests.